Hi everyone, thanks very much for turning up for the Sustainability, Building Better and Greener panel discussion this afternoon. Recently, our conversations have mainly focused on the pandemic. However, the biggest catastrophe we all face, which has been looming on the horizon for decades, is the climate crisis. And this has been made even more prominent over the last week or so with the COP26 announcements that have been coming out over the last few days. Scientists have been banging the drum about its effects for years, yet only now are businesses starting to think about and implement their ESG strategies. The built environment contributes around 40% of the UK's total carbon footprint. Legacy housing stock is dragging us down, and annual embodied carbon through construction alone is higher than the UK Green Building Council's target for total built environment emissions by 2050. Despite the fact that new homes give off more embodied carbon than refurbishing older property, the focus has always been on building new. For as long as I've been writing about the property market, the housing deficit has definitely overshadowed the progressive talk of sustainability. For those that haven't read it yet, the latest issue of the Bridging Commercial magazine is available on our stand just as you come out of this conference theatre. And in that, there's a deep dive into all things sustainable. So if you have any questions or you want some more features and information on our market and what we're doing, please do pick up a copy on your way out. While I received an overwhelming feedback story on how far away we are from an industrial green revolution, commentary and opinion from a wide range of experts, there was a sense of reluctance in the air in terms of sustainability and what people can do in the finance industry to help encourage sustainable building. If you don't think it will affect your business, you are wrong. Unpredictable weather will significantly impact livelihoods and homes. Millions of homes are in danger of flooding and overheating, something which is very likely to impact property valuations and insurance, and the lending market. This is something that property sectors got to get a handle on quickly, or we could see a distorted housing market with scores of stranded assets and less affected areas seeing prices soar. Joining me today are a fantastic panel of experts who all have their own unique opinions on sustainability, and they're all doing their own thing to combat the issues that the market has in terms of green and sustainable building. So I would like to hand this over to them to each give a couple of minutes talking about themselves to introduce and start.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Edward. I'm the principal at Uplift Finance. We're a small specialist property finance brokerage. A few years ago, I had an attempt at an eco development down south near Brighton that was using some carbon neutral modular tech from Germany, which failed. And I arranged the development finance on that site, and I got to understand some of the difficulties and some of the blockages that were holding back this market that I think has been kind of pushing up against the edges of wanting to boom, but there's been certain things holding it back, like planning, availability of mortgages, and availability of build finance. There's been a lot of very good reasons for that, but I think I wanted to set up a brokerage that actually solves problems and hopefully make a bit of money from creating or helping a marketplace that could have a positive effect. I think there's a blockage in this market. It's now really down to development finance because you can get planning and you can get mortgages. I think it's a hard problem to solve, but not impossible. And I think the timing is now a lot better than it was 5 years ago. I think I was a little bit early. My background is I was an analyst for Deutsche Bank and for a fund that was then called Babson. So I worked in syndicated loans and fixed income. So I understand debt, and I am a nerd. And I have my colleague Tom has a background in the nuclear industry, delivering things that I don't understand to submarines. So he understands supply chain risk. And what we're doing is next year we're setting up a modular sub-brand that will be pushing to manage the supply chain risk. We've tried to manage some of the financial risk so we can now help this market and market to a wider range of SME developers who I think will be the creative next generation.
Thanks for that, Edward. And Sasha?
Hello, hi. So I'm Aleksandra Njagulj, or Sasha. I am global head of ESG for DWS Real Estate. Originally, I'm an architect, and I've found actually sustainable built environment, interest in sustainable design and ESG through practice. So back when I was studying, and that's much longer ago than I like to remember, sustainability in architecture wasn't the primary concern. So started working in this field back in 2009 when ESG was not fashionable, and found myself in the hot seat in the house, which is quite nice. So I'm glad to finally see ESG getting the attention it deserves.
Thanks for that. And David?
Hi everyone, I'm David Travers. I'm the CEO of Impact Lending. Impact Lending provide smart financial products for property developers throughout the UK. We are part of a wider group, which is the Impact Capital Group. The Impact Capital Group itself really advocates sustainability. We have subsidiaries within the group. We have Impact Lending, which provide finance to property developers, as I've said, through sustainable stretch senior, mezzanine finance, bridging first and second charge. We have Impact Modular, which can actually manufacture the unit. We have Impact Working, which is a flexible office space through sustainability. And we have Impact Developments and Impact Smart Homes, who actually purchase land and achieve planning in order for the modular construction factory to build modular. So yeah, we are here to try and really make a positive impact. I think we need to address the great emergency of our time, which is climate change, and we are hopefully going to make a positive impact through our lending.
Thanks, David. And last but definitely not least, Chris?
So I'm Chris Gardner. I'm the co-founder and joint managing director of Atelier. We are a development lender, which is a joint venture between my management team and M&G Investments. We target small to medium-sized SME developers, typically up to 25 million GDV, 15 million loan size. We are in our third year, although we only launched into the market in January 20, just before the pandemic. Great timing. And we have just launched a pilot called the Carbon Light Challenge, which some of you may have seen, which is an attempt to reduce carbon in the built environment. And the way that we're doing that is we are focusing on embodied carbon, operational carbon, water and sustainability. So this goes way beyond the EPC. And the way we're doing that is we're trying to change behaviours through linking financial incentives to the reduction in carbon. So underpinning our product is a direct link between the amount of carbon that you save and the interest rate that you pay on the loan. Sitting above that, we have a very extensive panel of co-collaborators who are working with us, and we are working with the support of RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects. We feel that, the way that you reduce carbon in the built environment is starting with the design, which is why we've partnered with RIBA, and we've adopted the RIBA 25 and the RIBA 2030 targets to do that. So power of collaboration, bringing a product to market that we hope will dramatically reduce carbon way beyond the EPC.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Chris. Just to remind everyone in the audience that people at home are also streaming this live. If you want to send questions in, you can use the FP Show app, and you can get involved with commentary as we're discussing as well, so you can do that too. First question. From 2025, we've got a new future homes standard, which will require all new homes to be zero carbon ready. How do you guys think that the property finance industry is preparing for the new standard? David, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, I think that, I know we are preparing for it, but I think there's a real need for, lenders to enforce and encourage through changes in criteria, through potentially higher loan to cost, by mitigating your risk on your underwriting. So I think it's really, there needs to be a change throughout the industry. I mean, you walk around this room today and there's not much sustainable, there's not much green loan. So there really has to be a switch. And I think the people as part of the panel, we know what's coming. We know that the change is coming, and we're at the forefront of it, trying to, push our products, come up with great criteria, come up with USPs for green loans. I can't speak for any other lenders, but I know that we're doing what we can to promote green loans, sustainability through our criteria and loan to cost, etc.
Edward, from a broker's perspective, do you see enough, I guess, products coming out from lenders?
With climate change, that we're looking 5 or 10 years down the road and we see a bit of impending trouble. And I think that it would be much nicer if we can get ahead of the game here and see this as an opportunity to make money and sleep well at night about it and feel like we've made a good positive change. So I think you do see certain lenders price in a bit of carbon risk and up the total cost of debt. It would be nice, I think, as a psychological change. I think it feels like, as I say, this market is ready at some point over the next 18, 24 months to start growing pretty rapidly. And I think for entrepreneurs out there, they should keep an eye on it. So it's hard to, criteria tends to be restrictive. It tends to be, you can't do this. So it's a hard question to answer in a positive way. So I've avoided the question, but I've answered a slightly different question. So there we go.
No problem. Chris, I know in the story we ran about the carbon light challenge that you were saying that finance needs to be the oil in the cogs and not the hindrance. So what would you say in terms of what you're seeing across the market?
Well, the number of empty chairs in this room is an indicator of where we are. It's really quite difficult. We've had to invest probably £1 million in R&D so far to get to the point of launching the product. That cost is considerable, and it takes lenders way outside of their comfort zone. You are having to engage with areas of the market that you would not used to be engaging with. You're having to think about problems that you wouldn't usually have to think of as a financier. So the barriers to accessing this market are very large. But look, my view is with all change comes an opportunity, and this change is coming. Whatever your politics, whatever your view is on climate change, this regulation to get us to net zero is coming. So just get on with the program. I think there's a 3 to 5 year window where firms can commercialise this as an opportunity, and if you can commercialise the opportunity and reduce carbon in the built environment, what is there not to like about that?
Absolutely. Moving on to the risks that climate change poses on real estate assets across the UK, what are you seeing, Aleksandra, in terms of these risks? And do you think this could impact, I guess, the development and the finance of that?
Well, you have two types of risks. One coming from not acting to mitigate climate change. So your physical impacts from climate change can become more and more pronounced. Of course, we are going to face a certain level of extreme weather events and also chronic changes like hotter summers and so on. We have seen in this past few years that our homes, our Victorian homes, are becoming a little bit uncomfortable in unseasonably hot weather. So there is this issue of assets being resilient enough to continue to operate in this change environment. And of course, on the other hand, you have a risk of things moving and you not acting. So assets becoming stranded because simply they are not compliant with new regulations and new requirements. At the moment, we have what is called minimum energy efficiency standards for commercial landlords, and this includes residential, where you need to be at least, you need at least EPC E rated asset in order to legally rent it. There is a proposal to raise this to EPC level C, which is quite a lot higher. So if you're not decarbonizing your existing assets, you have a huge risk of stranding large proportion of your portfolio. And of course, you have new regulations coming in for new developments and so on that are going to require certain criteria satisfied. So you can risk your assets if you don't act, either on making them more resilient or more efficient, getting stranded all over the place. So, and because these are physical assets, and the action that we need to undertake is really physical. We literally need to go into these buildings and fix them. And we can't just build ourselves out of it. Of course, any new buildings need to be net zero carbon, they need to be efficient and so on, but we have huge amount of existing building stock. I think it's over 80% that's going to be around here in year 2050 when we are supposed to be net zero carbon. And if we don't deal with buildings that we have right now, we're never going to reach that. So it's all about, in my view, fixing, that's the biggest challenge, fixing the buildings that we already have, that we already use. And of course, there is that embodied carbon that was mentioned before that's actually sunk in those buildings, and we need to make sure that it's preserved in them. So, yeah, at the same time, if you do act, if you do fix your assets, if you make them resilient and energy efficient, then that's an opportunity. And we are seeing more and more, it's now beyond anecdotal examples that green buildings do actually rent better, that they have higher occupancy rates, and that they are more liquid and that sell for higher values. So there is a clear business case right now to actually do all of these things. Which wasn't the case maybe even 3 years ago. Before this whole trend of ESG, the market wasn't there and the reward for doing green things wasn't there. So quite a lot of investors and quite a lot of actors in the market were dragging their feet because the return on investment wasn't there. And this situation has finally changed, and I'm really seeing huge amounts of initiatives and actions in the market because of that.
David, do you think the development lending market...
There's a physical risk, which you're alluding to. You know, the current with the changes in the weather. There's I think there's another level of underwriting that needs to come in there. It might not be imminent, but if you're looking at something 10, 20 years down the line, you have to take into account the risk to the building. I think there's a transitional risk, which again you've alluded to. So going from the buildings the way they are now to almost transition into a more sustainable building. And there's a liability risk. So there's obviously risk from the insurers, which will come into play in the next 5 to 10 years. But to answer your question, I don't think a lot of development lenders are looking at this yet. It goes back to what Chris says. There's not a lot of people in this room. There's not a lot of sustainability being discussed out there. I just think it's a major issue that will come to the forefront in the next 5 to 10 years, and then it will be too late. So I think that lenders like myself and Chris, we are already taking that into account now, and we're trying to make the change up front before you have to look at a development and say, may happen to that in the future. So I don't think any development lenders are really taking it into account currently, which they should.
What would you all say are the main stumbling blocks to achieving sustainable build and finance?
Can I start with that one?
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah,
I think by far and away at the moment, the biggest problem around sustainability is gas. So if you really want to get to net zero, if you're really serious about cutting carbon, changing construction behaviour is one thing, that's going to take years, but actually decarbonising the energy supply in the first place is I hate the phrase, the low-hanging fruit. So we've got millions and millions of tonnes of gas being pumped into houses, and we've still got lots of unsustainable electricity being used. So first things first, let's start decarbonising the energy supply. That way, if we're slightly less efficient and it takes slightly longer to getting rid of gas.
I think there's a real issue with modular construction, modern methods of construction, and what I said at the start, we've got our own manufacturer. So we sort of looked at this a couple of years ago, and we were already financing developments. We looked at it, there was an opportunity for the group itself to purchase a modular manufacturer, because we had already seen some developments where the main lenders in the UK were struggling to finance the 20-30% deposit that's required for modular construction. Now this is a real issue now as well, because essentially we are mitigating the risk ourselves by owning the financing arm and the modular construction. But for the rest of the industry, it's tough. I mean, I was having a conversation with Chris earlier. They look at modular development, but you have to pay 20 or 30% to the factory prior to the development even starting, spade in the ground, you know. So there's an issue there that there has to be a way that we can overcome that. I'm not saying everyone should come, well, everyone should come to us and look at modular and finance at the same time, but this has to be an industry conclusion that we come to, whether it's through insurance or whether it's through the modular construction factories getting some backing from somewhere. But I see that as the main issue. I also see, I mean, the construction industry hasn't moved for 40 years. They're set in their ways, and they all look at the top line, you know, what's the profit, how much is it costing? Now, I understand why they do that, but we need to start thinking bigger and think, well, it may cost more now, but there's a premium on green property. The property is going to be more energy efficient. It's just about getting, you know, the message across. And I think by us being here today, we're obviously starting the process. But so yeah, I think there's a lot of issues that we have to overcome, but at least we're starting to try and move that forward.
Can I just come back in on another point there? When we look at the green premium, I actually don't think where we are at the moment in the market there is a green premium. I don't think people are prepared to pay more for a sustainable home. But what I can tell you, it costs 10% more to get to REBA 25, which is about a 50% cut in carbon, and about 15% more to get to REBA 2030, which is a 65% cut in carbon. So one of our partners that we're working with is Savills as in the valuers. They're very interested in this because they want to understand, is there a green premium? Are people prepared to pay more for sustainable homes? You know, the jury's out on that one at the moment, but we do know that it costs more. We do know that the properties are unlikely to sell for more money. So look at that from a developer's perspective. That is a disincentive to the developer. And actually that's one of the issues that we are trying to address with our product. But there are lots and lots of commercial stumbling blocks as well as physical ones.
Absolutely, and obviously you're talking about the green premium there. Well, we don't have the data right now, but is it quite clear that there will be a brown discount? I think that's what they've been labeling it as.
Well, you know, there are two ways to push, if you like. You know, the leaders are always going to be the leaders. You need regulation to get those in behind. And we had Code for Sustainable Homes years ago, and unfortunately it was cut away. So I think we lost some momentum there. You know, back then I was working actually for a construction company, and I hear you when you say, well, you know, construction companies haven't moved, but construction companies also work to, you know, 2 to 3% profit margin. So there's not very much meat in there to cut. So they need to be able to obviously continue to operate, and construction industry has hugely suffered both in a credit crunch and in this recent crisis. So I think this sort of you know, business case hasn't been really wrapped up properly. You know, especially in housing industry. People might not see that, you know, that there is actually a benefit in them buying a sustainable home because they're going to have lower utility bills and so on, so they might not be still prepared to pay more for those homes. So it doesn't actually pay for the developer to make more sustainable homes because they can't get their money out and so on and so on. So, you know, this question of who pays, you know, who benefits and who invests, if you like, extra effort or extra money to develop this property, that's where the disconnect is. You know, when it comes to lenders and in this whole industry, they always say, well, it's too far away from us, we can't influence it, you know, it's too far. Construction say, well, we only build whatever we are told to build, and we're going to value engineer it to death, you know, so that we can, you know, protect our very slim profit margin. Developers as well are going to look at regulations and say, well, okay, what is it the market wants? You know, what it is that regulatory requirements are, and we're going to build to that. So, you know, everything just stays as it is because of that. So something needs to push it. And this is where policy comes in play. I think, you know, first and foremost, we need the regulatory environment. And again, going back to this Code for Sustainable Homes, which did exist, it was a really good plan forward, you could see, from code, I don't know, level 3, 4, 5, you needed to achieve ultimately net zero carbon, and everybody had also, everybody could look forward and say, well, okay, in the next 5, 10 years, we need to be level 6, and we could sort of prepare ourselves, on the construction side, developer side, everybody to that new standard. So this is where I think, again, policy is incredibly important to give that visibility to the entire industry on what is the plan ahead and the timeline so that we can actually prepare and move all together, so that all the players in the market are in the same position as they move, if it makes sense. So nobody is disadvantaged by doing something responsible by somebody who is not doing that and having lower costs and therefore more profit. So that we do need that baseline, if you like, to be pushed, and that only can come from the government.
I'm curious to know if anybody, when it comes to green premium, is there a problem with scale here? If the build cost is, if it is the case that building to a higher eco standard is more expensive, is some of that going to reduce over time as these manufacturers start to scale up? Do you think there's economies of scale that will be gained?
Well, I think there will be economies of scale, but I look at it as it's a basic case of home economics. If you look at a family need to move home. They're likely to stretch themselves up to the limit financially to move from house A to house B, maybe a change in additional family member or whatever. They will buy what they can afford, and if you put two houses side by side at the same price, they'll probably choose the eco house. If the eco house is 10% more expensive, they won't. And I think we see that with electric cars. That's a bad proxy, but it's the closest we've got. Yeah. And I think things like longer term savings in energy costs, they're intangible at the moment. So
the adoption of tax incentives in other countries in Europe for electric cars, for example, have made them more adopted. Like for example, like Denmark, there's loads of Teslas around, whereas on the streets here they're quite rare. Do you think there should be more of a tax incentive, like maybe a stamp duty incentive for eco homes? Do you think that could help solve some of the issues?
I think the values will increase more than your average house. I've got a friend who lives in one of the urban splash houses in Birmingham, and he paid a little over the odds for it, and it's a bit nicer than the houses in that area. But Urban Splash were able to take a really, really good product and put it in an area that wasn't very nice, and create a community. And he's got a house that's now where he paid $280,000 for it, which I know in London gets you a wardrobe, but it's now worth about $330 because it's scarce. So, okay, if it costs more, are people going to pay more for that? In that instance, it's actually a valuable product, and the value does translate, oddly enough, into money. It's a personal bias. I hope that people's, I hope that the value and the profit gets borne out in the values of those properties rather than being imposed by government restriction. I think that'll be a better way to do it. And I think people will pay more. You're quite right. If you're a young couple starting out, you're not really going to want to pay 10% more for a house, particularly at a time when asset prices compared to income are at some of their highest ever ratios. However, if you're maybe late 30s, early 40s, you're on your second home, you're looking at something that will actually have capital appreciation, it's not a bad bet. You're going to have scarcity, and in a stressed scenario like last year, it's those scarce assets that actually hold their value. There's a flight to quality. Double-edged. I think it's not just a case of it costs more; it might actually be worth more too.
Absolutely, and we've obviously talked about how lenders are working around or trying to work around this green premium that we don't have worked out as of yet. And there's also the higher projected build costs, and at the same time we've got supply chain issues, we've got costs going up for materials anyway, and we've got a shortage of labour. So how are you as lenders trying to work around all of that on top of the sustainability challenge?
So speaking from personal experience, we offer an extra leverage, so we'll go up to 75% loan to GDV. will cover 90% loan to cost. The inherent lower cost of capital that comes with our particular product also helps the capital stack as well. But, you know, put all of that to one side, you know, you need to make sure that you're lending prudently, you're lending responsibly at the same time. So those additional costs, the additional costs in the supply chain, the additional costs of going green, all still have to be factored into the cap stack. There's only so far you can go before you are entering into dangerous credit territory. So it's getting a balance between the two. But also as well, a lot of it is understanding new credit risk when we're talking about that as well, because if we're using new materials, new methods, new ways of working, they sometimes have inherent, anything new in the sphere of credit has inherent risks, and you have to understand those and adapt to them. And that in itself should be an incentive for lenders to start to make this change now, because this isn't just about some kind of abstract concept. This will radically change people's business models, the way they view risk and the way they view the use of capital.
What other challenges does the rapid adoption of new technology and MMC materials pose on the built environment?
Well, that's a tough one, but technology is fundamental. It has to happen, and it is going to cost more. I mean, I feel as if we're all up here talking. It's sounding pretty bad because the costs are going through the roof. But it does have to happen.
Sorry, carry on.
No, so yeah, technology, it has to happen. It comes at a cost, though. It's like everything we are discussing here. So yeah, eventually it can work out, but you know, the cost to implement that, it might become, you know, it's tough just now to overcome the costs. I think going back to just quickly on what Chris was saying there, we're the same as Chris. We're lending up to 75% loan to GDV. We're at 90% net loan to cost. We've got our own green criteria, which is slightly different to Chris's. We're sort of trying to move in smaller steps. So we've got 3 categories within our criteria. And if the developer's using products from one product from category A, they qualify for our sustainable developments. Category A includes heat source pumps, EV charging ports, solar panels. So we're trying to take smaller steps. Category B and C, you need to have 3. You need to use 3 products within that, essentially. So we are trying to take the steps to make it easier for the developers to say, okay, I would like the cheaper rate. If I have to put heat source pumps in to get the cheaper rate, it might be worth it. To get the higher loan to cost, if I have to put solar panels in, it might be worth it. So yeah, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question on the technology there, but I think it all comes as a cost. And it's a cost a lot of people aren't willing to part with currently.
Would you guys agree that sustainable developers have to take into account potentially higher contingency costs than I guess standard developers?
So I think there's always a risk with that, but just a couple of things to think about just for a second. The kinds of things we're going to have to consider in the kind of cost stack. Carbon offset. So offsetting is a feature of any carbon reductive scheme. So as lenders, in the same way that we fund professional fees, construction costs, interest costs, and all the other bits and pieces, we're going to now have to start to consider how we deal with carbon offsetting contracts, additional architects' fees, additional carbon management fees. There's all sorts of new costs and new challenges that are going to come into the cap stack that we've got to understand. Now, I know about offsetting because we've been working on our offsetting policy for carbon light, but these are complicated legal concepts that we've never considered before. So all of these add to the additional credit risk. specifically addressing your question there, what challenges do the rapid adoption of new technology pose on the environment? I suppose they're obvious. With all new technologies, nobody knows how long they're going to last. No one knows what the unintended consequences are. Bad analogy, but once upon a time, asbestos was the wonder material, wasn't it? And look where that got us. So, there are lots of things here, lots of potential pitfalls, but we shouldn't let any of that put us off moving forward. This is a frontier. We have to. As a claim that is some kind of green magic. EPCs are a very, very limited thermal measure. They do not measure carbon, they do not measure sustainability, and they do not measure the impact of carbon holistically. So anyone thinking a green an EPC is an easy way to go green. That's greenwashing.
They're limited also. They're only, as you say, measuring energy and plugins and the actual consumption of the building are not really recognized. So they're a theoretical model that really doesn't resemble anything what the building actually is. But what built-in industry has over other financial products, if you like, in asset classes, is building certification. So things like BREEAM, for example, and this code for sustainable homes was a sustainability assessment that looks at how the process is managed, how the building is managed. It looks at, of course, the energy from the building. It looks at materials it's built from. It looks at biodiversity, health and well-being, pollution, all kinds of things. The holistic assessment of both the construction process or the refurbishment process, but you can also do operational certification. So I would say that is the most robust way to prove your credentials as at a property level. And then on a portfolio level, if you're looking to lend against a portfolio, there is a global real estate sustainability benchmark, which is again a comprehensive audit of a portfolio practices, both on the manager side and also portfolio on performance. And again, it has been around since 2008, so it has pretty good credentials, and it's very much accepted across the industry. So we do have these two systems, both on an asset and a portfolio level, to benchmark sustainability. They're not perfect, of course they're not, but if you want to be credible, I think that needs to be used. Otherwise, any metric in real estate that's not really reliant on certification is going to be a little bit suspect.
How do you, Edward, cut through the greenwashing noise when you're looking for lenders to work with in the sustainable market?
Well, to be honest, I look for manufacturers to work with first, and architects to work with. I think you can be marginally better, but you can make incremental change. It doesn't have to be that slow. You can try to push it a little bit quicker. I think if you're setting up a new modular manufacturer and you're using concrete, 80% concrete or something, that's a little bit too much. As we were talking about that, I did think about the nitrate. Some of the sort of nitrate offsetting that's been happening a little bit in the Solent, where the developments, they were told to stop building because they were producing too much nitrate. They didn't know how to solve it. The only way they could solve it was by buying farmland, taking that farmland out of use. So on average, the amount of nitrate is going down for the development, which it's, I suppose, is one way of approaching it, but it's not ideal. It's, in fairness, I don't think. I think there's people can tell when there's fairly obvious greenwashing. I think anybody who's seriously involved in it, there's not too many offenders, really. It'd be nice to see a bit more wood used. It's surprising people don't talk about wood enough, and I suppose it's because some of the quality in the UK isn't that great. But I would like to completely change and just reiterate something earlier David said. is that I think the main blockage to this industry as a broker, the main thing that stops me is the tech is there. There is some really, really good manufacturing methods, particularly in Europe and Japan and so on. But the problem I have as a broker is deposit cash flows. Again, as you said, we're in a position where we can now get mortgages, we can get planning, but the developer is required to have 30, 40, 50% of the build cost in cash to send to a factory. It's the same thing I said to you 2 years ago, but it does now. There is now instances of cash being advanced to factories, some factories overseas, for components. It's starting to happen in a smaller way. It is happening in Europe, and I think it will be ready to happen in a larger way fairly soon if we start borrowing from certain areas of trade finance, we start looking at shipbuilding, aircraft, that sort of thing. That, to me, will open up modular to SME developers. That modular tends to be a bit more eco, not always, and that is. I know that isn't the question. Again, you asked me, but I've been wanting to get that one out.
No, please.
That is the thing that I'm going to be at next year. We've started to do it on a bespoke basis. If we can get that in a off-the-shelf product, it will open the market up and get the ball rolling. So from my side, that is my one little beachhead that we'll be focusing on next year.
We've got just under a minute, so I just want to see if there's any audience questions, and if there's any questions, I guess, from people who are streaming this live as well, that I assume would come up if they have. And I got to know. So do we have any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask the panel? Anything which you want to know a bit more about? Yes, we've got a question here.
Very interesting presentation. I don't think most small, mid-sized developers we deal with believe there is a green premium yet. Have you done any market research or analysis that compares a reduced cost of capital to offset the additional cost of building an eco-home? So what does that need to look like to get a developer to switch from a standard method of construction?
Thanks very much for that question. Savills on that. So Savills have been working with us for about 7 months on as you might imagine, have a huge research department. Carbon light went up last week, and the rebate on that is 207,000. The additional cost to get it to REBA 25, we believe, is about 450. So we're meeting just under half of that additional on cost. I guess what we're trying to seek in the pilot are developers who may be doing this for other reasons. So to your point about making the switch from standard construction to these new greener constructions, I think that's a question for further down the line for us. If I can get 4 or 5, for me, proof of success is 25 to 40 million of loans written and out the door by next June. Probably 4 to 6 loans, I would imagine. We're looking for developers that are looking to pilot their own capability, looking to cultivate their own sustainable supply chain, and not just looking at the economics, looking beyond that, knowing that in the end the economics will sort themselves out, if that makes sense. But we're trying to mitigate some of that risk for them by paying a rebate. And also as well, seeing whether a financial incentive is in fact the right incentive.
It's a pretty exciting number there for the rebate, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that case study in the next couple of weeks or so. Any more questions at all before we put this to a close? If there's no more questions, I just want to remind everyone that we do have the sustainability issue from the Bridging Commercial magazine just on your left as you exit the theatre. This is free, and you can subscribe for free as well. And we do cover sustainable initiatives often in the magazine, but this whole magazine's on it. And all four of the panelists are included in this magazine, so they've got all of their ideas and products which we've been talking about today. But thank you very much to our fantastic panelists, and thank you guys for joining us.